welcome back to the gallery. It's a Thursday morning, at least morning for me on the West Coast, and a few hours ahead on the East Coast for Joe. We have Joe Marchese here from Human Ventures. He was the first LP in Human. What was it, Joe? You said 8 years ago, almost a decade ago?
8 years ago, yeah.
First LP, and now technically a GP in Human. And if you haven't been living under a rock in studio world, you've definitely heard of Human Ventures. You've probably been following them for most of the last decade. So today we're going to get into a bunch of topics. It's going to be a little more freeform around being an LP, pitching LPs, how to structure the studio, but rooted really in the story of Human Ventures, which I think a lot of us are curious about. So Joe, great to have you here. Pleasure to connect. Thanks again for coming on. Take us back to how you and Heather got connected and how you became the first LP in the studio and what happened from there.
So Heather and I were friends first, and we just kind of were like-minded on investing in the love of New York City. And we thought New York City is one of the best places in the world to start a business, but it's also one of the hardest places in the world to start a business. Like 8 years ago, yeah. New York City didn't have a center of tech the way San Francisco did. Like New York City was... it had finance and media and entertainment. It had all of the elements and industries, but that made it very hard. It was very fragmented. And so we thought, I had sold my company to 21st Century Fox, and I was going in to run the advertising business there. And we can talk about how that informs a lot of my thinking today. But I took the proceeds, other than my house and my mother's house, and basically backed Heather as the first LP and co-founder of Human Ventures, the studio. And people ask us why we structured it the way we did as an LLC. And I think we informed the building of a studio. Like I know as a founder, what you start your company as isn't ever what it ends up as. Whatever that business plan is you had on day one, it's probably wrong by month 6, if not sooner. The world changes, tech changes, the economy changes, like you pick it. And so we wanted to be founders, and we were founders of a studio. And so that's where the journey began.
Can you tell us just briefly about the company that you had sold to 20th Century Fox beforehand?
So it was an advertising technology company, but it was kind of counter consensus. It was trying to do fewer, better ads. It was the idea of, engage with this one ad and we'll get rid of all the rest, like things like that. And, at the time it was James Murdoch, had seen it and was thinking and he just really saw around corners and what was coming, that advertising on television was a negative experience and it was hurting the business overall. Like making the most money possible was actually leading to a worse user experience. And
Sure.
And that kind of idea of it, taking that concept of Trux and infusing it into the $3.5 billion a year ad business that was Fox. With Super Bowl, the World Series, The Simpsons. So it was massive operation, and just so interesting because it's an industry that knew change had to come. And here we are today, by the way. Every streaming service needs to add an ad platform. Uber's an advertising company at this point, right? Not advertising in full, but they actually make ad money now. Amazon's advertising business is a driver. So, it was such an interesting thing to watch. And it was fascinating to be in the seat and watch how hard it is to change at the big companies, and just reinforce the fact that when an industry wants something, it has to be from startup world that you change things.
Sure. So before we get into like LP, GP, classic studio conversation, I'm really curious about what's it like and what was it like early on being probably the only person in the studio world who has some media background. Even today, there's pretty much, to my knowledge, no one really there aside from maybe a few other folks that it's the same names that all come to mind anyway. What's your perspective like as like the media guy in the studio world?
Yeah, I guess we've always had this, it's kind of two parts to Human, right? Which is, and my focus, and I guess where I'd call media, but even more broadly, is the attention economy, right? And the thesis there is that attention is the root of everything else. You want people to buy a product, you need their attention. You want to tell them a story about your business, you need their attention. You want to raise money, I need your attention. You want to hire someone, you need to get their attention, right? Like that is kind of this bigger picture. And so, it informs a lot, and to be able to see the inefficiencies in the advertising market. The single biggest expense for almost every single startup after people it's sales and marketing. If you're B2B, it's sales, and that's just one-on-one trying to get attention. If you're B2C, it's marketing, and that's one-to-many trying to get attention. And seeing that, I think there were so many false positives in that, where people could acquire a customer, but then when they stop spending marketing dollars, they lose the customer. So I guess, what became early on one of our superpowers was this idea that we could help. We can't guarantee that companies won't waste money on advertising, but we can help them be a little bit better at it.
Yeah. Did you find that there was an element of, when you're crafting your, even still, like raising money for the studio, fundraising for your portfolio companies, there's a big element that's just like, how do we get attention from investors and craft the right story? And I remember a few years ago, a friend of mine was like, fundraising is literally just storytelling. You'll do great.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, I never really thought of that. Of course, you need to be able to, in the story, you need like a track record and to back up why you're the right person to do this.
I don't know. Do you see 2020 and 2021 and 2022? I mean, maybe you do now.
I mean, even then, like, I had no business becoming an LP and try to raise a fund of funds for studios at 25, 26 years old. We raised half the fund just off a good story and like a nice deck, right? The world went where it went, but like, and what the attention economy. I remember even a few years ago, you guys, I don't know where it ended up, but you were launching a PE fund. Like, was it Attention Capital, if I recall correctly?
Yeah, yeah. That's all. It's all human now. Like it was pre-COVID, but like it was dealing much more with events businesses and laying out, which obviously COVID said not do that. Which I mean, thankfully for me, it ended up focusing. I still do advisory work through that, but like it focused everything and including our interest in Tribeca, which we had bought with that under human. But the thesis is the same. I actually still I'm looking at some of the same businesses that I really want to get into. That this idea that there's an inefficiency in the world's largest market, like having a subprime bubble in advertising. Like we knew the mortgages were garbage, but we kept trading them until it finally collapsed. Like there is so much garbage in advertising right now that inefficiency is driving like the global economy. And go a step further, and this isn't garbage. This is actually just highly effective advertising. Performance marketing at the bottom of the funnel. If you're a startup, you pay me money to a performance marketer, right? They give you a customer. And then the customer, if you're not paying next time, that performance marketer is going to do everything in their power to send you to someone else. Not only will they actively not send you a customer, they actively want to take your customer and give them to somebody else. So that insertion into the flow of commerce, it is so much more relevant for more businesses than you know. And as you know, Heather focuses on the kind of health and wellness side of the world and future of work, where I focus on the media and hospitality side. But on her side, a female healthcare company that's trying to figure out if they're going to buy a billboard, how will I know if it works, right? Like it is a horizontal, not a vertical, when you think about advertising.
Sure. So let's shift gears. Let's go back to the LP, the capital side. So it's the 20 teens. You come in as the first LP. Mm-hmm. I assume that at some point, I mean, tell us about when did the next set of LPs come in and how did it go from you and Heather funding this thing to now we're building a studio. There's a couple other studios in the world. No, they're not talking to each other really. And we need to fund this thing. What happened next?
Yeah. I mean, we set it up as an LLC. We capitalized it. I capitalized it. And then Heather and I put together a plan, just kind of like you were just talking about, and said, hey, here's what we think. We think New York City is a great place to find founders. It's a great place to find a diversified set of founders. Here's the track record of what we've done. Here's how we want to set this up. We want to basically be the most sought after co-founder in the world. Like we want to act like a co-founder. Share the same equity, be on their side of the table when they go raise their first capital, et cetera. So we had exactly how we were going to set it up. We had our first couple of founders that we were going to bring in. And then we went out and raised with a valuation on the LLC, just like you would go raise for a company, right? Rather than raising for a fund per se. Because the thesis was around New York City, the humans we would find and the infrastructure we put around founders.
And I think
go ahead. What's that?
Were you calling that a startup studio?
Yes, we were. We were calling it a startup studio. In the entertainment land out in LA, we talked about it like, oh, it's like being an executive producer of startups, right?
I just moved to Los Angeles and make the Hollywood studio reference. Like, oh yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, totally, got it. Didn't make sense back then.
I'm telling you, like you were saying, storytelling, executive producing. founding a company. It's all, there's only one book everyone needs to read, and that's called Stone Soup. It's the children's book. And the story basically goes, they go into a town that's starving. And he says he can make soup from a stone. Everyone laughs at him. He makes a big deal out of the perfect stone in the fire. And then finally someone pokes their head out and goes, wait, you can really make soup from a stone? He's like, I could, I just need some carrots. And they put in carrots, and they does the same thing with potatoes. And the children's message is that if you all share, if everyone contributes to that pot, everyone eats. Right.
Mm.
But the founder's message to that is he had to tell a story worth convincing people to each contribute what they're good at. Oh, I could change the rideshare industry if I just had some technology. I could change the rideshare industry if I just had some money. Right. And then all those things come together. And that really is what founding looks like.
That is a brilliant analogy. It makes me think, damn, how many other children's books that we got like the first level, the first layer lesson out of it actually had a deeper lesson that can be applied to entrepreneurship.
I use so many different ones that I think it's a lot simpler than, because it's human and it's nature. The key though is, okay, so you need that ability to gather resources and storytelling. And you need a space that you're right is going to be disrupted for some reason. Like we ask two questions of founders, and then from there we can break up everything else. The why now, why you. So the why now is every idea has been had. I do have an allergic reaction to anyone trying to send an NDA before they want to come pitch. I was like, if your pitch is your secret, then you're in trouble. There's an old Dilbert cartoon where it's like, he's like, I've got a $1 billion idea. I just need this, and this. And so she's like, so you don't have anything. And so the why now is what has changed in the world that this idea is ready to come into being. Rick Rubin's book, A Creative Way, I highly recommend to everybody. He talks about ideas are just in the ether. Again, he said it's so much more eloquent than I ever had, but I've always been like, your idea isn't novel. So something changed in the world. That's the why now. Could be a technology, et cetera. Then the why you is, okay, now let's imagine that idea has been had 1,000 times and 1,000 people right now have that idea. Why are you going to win? Like what is going to be different? Could be the better storyteller, could be the better tech, could be the approach, could just be more driven, won't give up. I mean, I have seen different versions of that be the thing that's success. And because we invest so early, like we have to believe in that.
Got it. Okay. All right. A lot of good stuff. The piece that I think in this moment most curious about is like so you're out in the world. It's like 15-ish. You start building. Yeah, this good thesis. And then there was an evolution from there. It was like, all right, this isn't exactly working how we planned. Like there's probably more studios popping up. What happened next? Like what was the kind of beginning of human phase 2?
So the human phase 2, and this is all Heather at the time. I'm an executive chair. On the board. I have, I can work with companies that have nothing to do with the advertising or media space because I'm full time with Fox running the ad business. And so we realized, okay, we're building these businesses. We need a fund because we have outsized ownership, but it's very expensive to stay on. We can't keep investing off the balance sheet of a studio. So the studio wouldn't be able to self-fund all of these businesses. Also, the time horizon is very long. They talk about a 7-year harvest period for a seed fund. Imagine if you're pre-seed to studio, like you're going concept forward. So you need time. So Heather raised the first fund, so our second vehicle for Human, which was a $25 million fund, incredibly notable people. So the studio ended up bringing all in about $25 million, like a kind of a who's who in media and advertising, finance, just because we wanted the LPs to reflect what we have down here in New York, what our superpower is.
Yeah.
And she raised the fund. Again, some pretty notable VC investors with large family offices. And then that began to be able to invest. And then we began to realize that the flywheel was that because we were builders, we were seeing deals very early. And people would come to us. And even if it wasn't a fit to build in the studio and to build with them, it was maybe a fit in 6 months to be a seed check. And it was maybe a fit. So then we were investing in things that weren't even coming out of the studio just because of the brand we built as Human. And that where the real aha was that because we're really good at media, marketing, our network, right? There were people who wanted Human on their cap table, all money being equal. And they wanted builders on their cap table. And so that became, we ended up doing way more investments than we did builds at the time, but the two just kept feeding each other.
Sure. So you kind of, I think, glossed over like a pretty crucial piece here. which is, yeah, so Heather went out and raised $25 million from a bunch of notable big time
Mhm.
investors, family offices, LPs, etc. How? Like, how did you do
Well,
that? Where did can you break that down as simply as possible here?
Um, well, I mean, you'd have to have Heather for that because, like, I was there to help, but I was in support, right?
Yeah.
It was her name on the documents, and I was still executive chair of the LLC. But we'd already had success in the LLC at bringing in top notch founders, like some high quality businesses. You know, the LLC. It's almost like when you raise the next fund before you finish, like right after the first fund is going, but you need enough track record to show, look, this was our thesis. It's going now. Here's a fund for the opportunity that we're getting to go with here.
Hmm. Okay. I've always been intrigued by every now and then, and for the record, like I grew up in New York and got
Yeah.
into entrepreneurship when I was like 14, and then I moved out west and got into the startup scene when I was 18 with an agency.
Mm.
And over the years, I was always and I became close with like Techstars crew and Brad and Seth at Foundry and that whole world. And so
Mhm.
I started noticing every now and then you'd see some like big headline of like the who's who within a space or either adjacent spaces coming together to back this
Mhm.
thing. And then we saw
Right.
that play out over years of like that became funds, right? Like Andreessen is
Mhm.
backing this thing. It's like the stamp of approval. And if you're the
Mhm.
founder behind that and you rallied all those people, it was now like you're sworn in. And as the Gen Zers would say, like
Mhm.
you're goaded. That's what they say now.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
Gen Z friends taught me that one recently. So you guys did that. You kind of rallied these people who were not
Mhm.
necessarily doing this thing yet. You told this story and came up with this new mission or project, and we're like, look who's coming together to do this new thing. Now let's go do it.
Yeah.
Was that successful? Did that actually play out, or what happened from there?
Yeah. I mean, well, look, I think you'd have to say New York is as good as it's ever been. And I'd say the best it's ever been right now in terms of an investment landscape.
Yeah.
Like the types of companies being started. You know, we like to think that the types of founders. I mean, during this time, Heather had just not by mandate, just by way of being 52% female founders in our portfolio, like unheard of. A crazy cross section of industries and healthcare and wellness and future of work, which is, you know, instead of being verticalized. And so we think that that was I mean, there's so many elements that came together to make New York what it is now. But like, you know, having been there and built a brand in there, it just was a huge advantage.
Sure. There's, I think, a really underspoken about element to being in studio world that needs to be celebrated, which is essentially how contrarian studio GPs are. They're
Hmm.
going out and being like, I'm going to raise a venture capital fund, but it's going to be different for whatever, however they want to skin it. Like that's basically
Yeah,
what
yeah,
they're saying. And they're getting punched in the face a lot, hopefully not literally, but figuratively, and being told no a lot. And they still push forward, and some of them close up shop or give up at some point. Fine, we're humans, like that
yeah.
happens. Some persevere and figure it out.
Right.
What was your perspective personally, or even looking around at the people you were doing this with, of like falling asleep at night, having a tough conversation with your spouse for years of
Yeah,
doing this thing that's like very
yeah.
contrarian within venture, which at times had boom and bust. Like, what was that like for you guys?
You know, I was incredibly fortunate. I had sold my company. I did very well in selling my company. I did take, you know, like a vast majority of my wealth and proceeds from it to back human, but like it wasn't. The questions came when it's like, oh man, okay, so what's the horizon of human? It's not a revenue generating company. The fund, the studio, but now we have so much deal flow, and so this hybrid of being able to build and invest. You see a lot of funds now trying to start studios, right? And they're coming there, and like I look. I think it's pretty tough. Like we've all had an investor who has a banking background that has opinions on how you should operate a business. Like it's worth what you pay for it, right? And so, like I think where we've had is we've gotten to this point now where we're raising a flagship fund, and this will be the first time I'm a GP with Heather on the fund side, right? But now we have the LLC, which is the studio self-sustaining, feeding our investments and bringing in founders. And then the brand holistically kind of works with each other. And so the fund will do one or two builds, right? Maybe a year. We don't have to force anything. If we do one build in a year, fine. If we do zero, fine. But with the build, we'll get outside ownership. The fund will get the economics. The fund will invest in it. Everything's self-contained in the fund. It just has all the benefits of the LLC existing. And then the fund can make investments just standard, right? And so that vehicle is so much easier for LPs to understand. The anchors for this fund that we're about halfway through raising now is Bank of America and the Teachers Association, Churchill, and this is the first institutional fund, like I said, a flagship for us. But it takes everything that we've done, all the groundwork we've laid in New York, and said, okay, we see the deals, we have the ability to build one or two when we need to. I think this is the best time, and then add to it, this is probably the best time to invest in New York. I mean, right after the hype cycle, there's talent available, there's office space available. I'm coming to you from this beautiful office space. I promise you, we did not pay for this in nearly what it looks like. It was a pandemic special. So AI is coming. Like, things are changing. So what a great time to be building.
Sure. I want to ask, like, if you were to do this today, would you do it differently? You are doing it today, but the way you're structuring it, I would assume, is largely based off of what, for lack of a better word, like the baggage of the last better part of a decade, like all the things that are already in place you have to kind of play with. If you were to start this from scratch today and there was no baggage, would you be structuring it the same way?
Well, I don't know. Like, I would say that the fund that we're doing today is a 2 and 20 fund. Everything looks exactly as is, and the economics are exactly as is. So the real question is, 8 years ago, structuring it as an LLC, the first studio, could it become revenue generating? Like, I've seen different strategies work, right? Working with large corporates, like to offset operational costs, so that I've seen, building revenue generating companies as the core of it, and then spinning off concepts. I like that one a lot. I might say I would, if I was doing it today, because I don't need to start the studio again because it already exists. So I guess where I'd actually say, I am like, where we are today is as good as we could have been, but it took us a long time to get to here, to have all of this. If I could today start with a revenue generating company and use that as the core of a studio, that would be the ideal outset, right? But then you also don't get the same investors. I mean, as we go into the LP world and start having conversations with the institutions and endowments, I mean, it unlocks things that you're able to do, just at a different level.
So you now have a lot of experience in the LP world, being one yourself, but now pitching them in the endowment world. I mean, that's like the top of the top, cream of the crop. That was a pretty good line, right? Top of the top, cream of the crop. Of the types of money that you can bring in. What would be your advice, for lack of a better word, to folks that are first time GP at a studio, starting to navigate that world? I mean, they obviously have some background or track record in raising money and to be able to even like get to that table in the first place. But from your unique perspective, what do you think folks need to not do? What should they be doing when they start navigating like those very rough waters of serious institutional investors for freaking startup studio that most have never even heard of ever?
I mean, honestly, I don't have an answer for it, because I don't know how you'd go to the institutions of that size to be a first time start. I mean, even us on vehicle 3 right now, we're just hitting the place where it makes sense, right? And again, Heather's had 100 times the number of conversations on the LP and institution side. So again, when we're done with the fund, I'm back to focusing on building with the entrepreneurs, right? That's the place I like to be. I jokingly call myself the chief marketing intern for some of our companies where we have outsized ownership. So I don't think you'd get it fund 1. I mean, maybe if you have something, but it's like the institutions, they have to see track record. They have to see, okay, you've actually invested this much, and so in the studio, maybe you've actually built this much. So maybe studio franchises. I know Atomic, can actually do it, because they can say, look, we're at studio franchises, but I don't think you'd go day one.
Right to the top. Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to the media and attention piece. I think it's one I'm excited for. I'm always most excited about that. Do you, how much do you lean on or leverage the media side of things for attracting new entrepreneurs to come in, and in building the studio and raising from investors for you guys?
I mean, you have to. That is the two pieces. Like Heather's half in kind of the knowledge and network and the health and wellness and kind of future work. And for me, it's the media world. I mean, uh, it is, I think, the biggest opportunity. I mean, think about it. The largest companies come out of tech, and I'm not saying whether this is good or bad, but Facebook, Google, Amazon are all advertising monsters, right? Uh, and so, like, I think there needs to be a trend where things aren't as ad based, and I think that ad based businesses are actually incredibly hard right now because Facebook, Google, and Amazon have to grow at 20% every quarter, right? And if they're growing, it has to come from somewhere. So because of that, you look at dependency on the platforms will eventually eat the margins of the things dependent on them. Look at the media company that through this last phase. Same thing with the D2C companies, realizing we need direct connections, we need to have physical stores. So it's core to everything we both say and our advantage. I mean, the bottles you see over my shoulder, where I spend a vast majority of my time, was a build out of Human LLC, right? First fund 8 years ago. Now it's going to return the fund many times over, right? But what it is, this Comos tequila is the fastest growing ultra luxury tequila in the world. And normally, when I say it's the fastest growing ultra luxury tequila in the world, the response is, "Oh, what celebrity is involved with it?" And the answer is none,
Mm-hmm.
right? The idea was one that the liquid is, and Richard Betts, the maker, is like the master craftsman is. But the most expensive thing about the alcohol business, like a lot of others, is branding and marketing. And if you waste dollars on things that are ineffective for you, or if you're not effective at sales, the best product can't win, right? And that is, I mean, that is a perfect example. Master craftsman, human partners with them, wanted to be the most sought after partner. Here we are. But then the particular skill set we have de-risks and even accelerates the business. Like as soon as product market fit is there, the juice is amazing, then that's where we can actually leverage.
So, I love it. Do you find yourself? Well, actually, I'll ask this first. You ever been in a position where you're pitching a founder hard, you really want them to come in and build with you, or is it usually not that hard for you guys to land great founders at this point?
I mean, look, we shouldn't have, if we have to pitch too hard, we shouldn't be pitching the founder, because then they're always going to think, oh, am I getting enough value? Like, there's always a conversation on equity, and like we have to have the founder think day one, man, any equity that human has, I'm going to be worth, 10, X% more the day after they start working on it, right? The day after they're with me, I'm going to save this in market. I'm going to save this. And so, and again, like I said before, we are bespoke at startup builds now, like meaning we're in no rush. If we do one a year, we do two a year, fine. If we do three a year, unlikely, because we don't have that much bandwidth to be focused and really helping. And so because we're not in a rush, we don't need to get a certain number of out. Our investing through the fund is really the main activity, because that gets us our portfolio, and the builds give us outsized ownership in areas of deep conviction. And so in those cases, we've probably known the founder for a long time. I mean, another one in the portfolio came second, more recent than Comos, was Groundswell. Jake Wood was the CEO and founder of Team Rubicon, a veterans organization. I was on the board. I knew him for the better part of a decade. And one day he's like, I want to build something.
Yep.
Like, corporate philanthropy is horribly broken. Like, there needs to be better, like a fintech-like approach to philanthropy. And I was like, yes. I mean, that's the level to which, like, there's not even a deck and a dream. There's just an idea and a space and a founder we know we want to work with. And you can take that level of risk if you're saying, the reason I could take that level of risk is because I'm going to be in there with you, building it from day one, from naming, from how we're going to set up the company, from which lawyers we use. So it allows you to go even earlier, because to be with a great founder, and there wasn't really pitching back and forth.
You guys have navigated, I think, in many ways over the years, at least from the outside looking in, like how to almost market how you provide value to founders. And the most relevant example is you guys launched Humans in the Wild at some point, and you ran a few
Mm-hmm.
cohorts. Can you talk us through some of the chapters and evolutions to how you make it known to the world that, like, we are, first of all, the name is human, right? We focus on the
Yeah.
people first, the humans. Can you walk me through some of the chapters that you went through and the biggest learnings from each of those that led to the next chapter and where you're at now then?
Yeah, look, I think um, in the early days we knew we had ideas of places we wanted to build in broad categories, and we would push hard to make sure we got something in there instead of, I think, really we just leave areas out in the ether. We would too much structure too early rather than saying, like, real founding of companies is a talented entrepreneur, a world class like founder has an idea of a need state in an area, and then you're just there to shape it and to be their partner, right? Like, you can see in any co-founding team, there's someone who's like the drive, and there are some that are more balanced than others, but like you know it, and so you have to treat studio foundry, or we have to treat studio foundry like that, like co-founding, like just being around someone who's like, I want to build, and man, I'd like to do it with you, and like we go. Um, then humans in the wild was, well, one, COVID. I think that there was one of it was, hey, how do we outreach? It's really easy to gather virtually right now. We can get cohorts. I mean, we've always believed that the network of founders are able to support each other unlike any other network. So we constantly were thinking, what are more ways to get our founders networked? Even people who went through humans in the wild cohorts that didn't end up building with human, we still stayed in touch with. Some we even invested in out of the fund. So it was this amazing relationship that we could start. And so that was more of hanging a shingle saying, apply, we need more. Now we've gotten to a place where ego aside, I don't think there are people who are thinking about building in New York that are thinking about maybe working with a studio that wouldn't know us. But at the same time, I don't think there are many people who could surprise us that we've never heard of or we don't know because we've been doing the events, and that would just say, I want to build with you, right? I don't think that's the relationship we're going to have. I think, our next build we've started for this fund. Yeah, and I know it's in the attention economy. I've wanted to build in this forever. There's a great founder. I mean, it's like that soup came together, right, of its own accord, and so I think that's the various chapters that led to here. And again,
Sure.
it's funny. I say this now. You have to. Um, I hate the expression "eat your own dog food," but like you have to practice what you preach. Maybe. Um,
Yeah.
Brand is everything. You want to lower customer acquisition cost, you have to have a brand. And this is why performance marketing is the false positives of, oh, give me $1, I'll give you $1 return, right? It's like, well, if I keep doing that, I don't have a business or a brand, and you sell to someone else. And so human as a brand, we've always said, like, how many events can we host? Like, how many times can we network? How can we be helpful when we're not there? And I know VCs have really, and that's why I insisted with Heather that I call myself a build partner, because VCs have really done a lot of damage to the line, how can I be helpful? But you should be. And if you are, you build the brand over time, and the brand over time lowers customer acquisition costs. Our customers are founders, whether we're investing in them or building with them.
Yep. At what point in the studio life cycle for you guys did you? Well, I'll rephrase. I mean, it's I think there's probably, and correct me if I'm off here, but I think there's an equation of like for X number of years, we're going to have to lean on the brand of our ventures to build the brand of the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, those ventures will be so successful that the studio
Yep.
brand will be off. Then the studio will become relevant and have a great reputation. And then it'll switch. So then every brand we build in the future, every venture we
Yeah.
build in the future is almost now given that seal of approval. Did you guys have some sort of equation like that?
No, I mean we didn't, because like we were learning, like we were first time studio founders when we started, Human.
Yeah.
So we were just both visionary slash naive enough to think, oh, we could do this, right? Um, and so we didn't have anything that looked that way. I would say now, looking backwards, as we've now gotten into a focus on the fund and investing with the build muscle like attached to it to create that flywheel. Um, I still think that the companies make up everything, right? Like I still CKBG Comos, like I said before, like where I'm operating with the founder there daily, right? And Richard Betts, for example, he's in Asia right now. He's going to launch 10 countries in the next 4 months. Like, I mean, it's just a behemoth of an organization. Um, and CKVG will always be the thing that people know. I don't know, like very few people know Human. Maybe they'll know I'm involved as I'm his co-founder, but I'm his co-founder in my role at Human, right? And so I don't know that I ever necessarily want it to switch because each company stands on its own. Because I also don't want people to say, oh, well, that company didn't work in Human. There's lots of reasons companies don't work. Like there's more that didn't than do. And I never get when founders, I've had companies that didn't work, right? And so when founders or investors give founders a hard time and like think that like that track record, if they tried everything and investors are going with their eyes open, like they should be doing everything to help the founder on the next time. So I guess I don't know. I mean, I appreciate that our brand's getting there,
Yeah,
but I still think it's the companies.
sure. When you
Well,
are, oh, go on.
I was going to say, but maybe that's also because of the way we do it. If we're looking to do 15 startups, if we're looking to build the business plan and hire a CEO, as I know other studios do, then you do need that, right? And so I guess I'm only thinking about it through the lens for which we're trying to both do much more investing and limited builds. But if you had to do a lot of builds, I could totally see it going the other way.
Sure. What's your take, almost like unfiltered, on 2023 startup studio ecosystem? What's great? What sucks? What needs to change? What do you think?
I don't know. I don't spend it because, again, not dodging the question, but because I spend more time with the companies than I do thinking about the investor landscape and LPs. Again, like Heather and I really have a great balance between us because we each like doing different parts of it. Um, I mean, I think there were probably some pretty predatory, like people didn't know what they're doing. Hey, give me 10% of your company and I'll do this, right? And they don't know what they're going to do, and then it gets negative feelings, and then those negative feelings go to everything else. Again, we're not doing the classes and cohorts anymore. We're much more thinking about one at a time. So it's not really something I spend a ton of time thinking about. But I could definitely see that at its peak of crazy and like people doing studios that weren't builders, it definitely could tarnish. I don't know. I worry more about human than human studio, but that's I guess a fair thing.
I think that's a very diplomatic and strong answer, to be good, to be candid.
Hey, listen, I've been in advertising for long enough to know when
Yeah,
not to answer a
you've done
question.
you've done your PR training. um, tell us about what's coming next for Human. You've got some awesome companies coming down the pike right now.
Yeah,
You
we've.
clearly have a
I mean,
kick-ass brand. What's coming up next?
I mean, you'll see. Like I said, I can't get much more into it, but we've started our first build in the second fund. We'll probably close this fund in Q1 of 2024. So like that will be like then we switch fully back to the build side. Although along the way we have started to invest out of it. I mean, we already have companies in the second fund that are being ready to or about to be marked up. And so, yeah, I think you'll see more of that. The new fund follows exactly the tracks that we've laid. We've dug these channels and now we get to benefit from them. So Heather's network in the health and wellness and future work, and mine in media advertising and the hospitality business. I mean, hospitality is such a huge employer across the US. And that's where you see like, these brands mattering again. And I think the other thing is that with AI, the platforms, the news feed, search, basically broke down media companies to their component parts. This clip next to that clip in the feed, right? With AI, might not want to ask ChatGPT what the fall fashions are, but if ChatGPT partners with GQ, I might ask that because there's a human editorial over the top. Trust matters again, brands matter again, and
Sure.
that means that everything's up for grabs. Like travel and hospitality sector, everything's based on search going down the funnel, hundreds of billions of dollars in market cap, and those
Yeah.
companies are really search advertising companies that then arbitrage, and go down. That's true for most industries. So, I mean, I think for us, there's going to be broad disruption. What is our specific application where we can be the most helpful? And so that's what we're looking at.
It's funny you bring that up. This is almost a side point, but I was thinking it was like a Sunday night thought, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday
Yeah.
before, where I'm building a company called Thursday Labs. Thursday's
Mhm.
one of the sponsors and the producer behind the gallery. For anyone who's listening and probably saw both logos next to each other and didn't understand the
Mhm.
connection, I run both. So,
Yeah.
uh, so Thursday Labs is positioned to be like how you said, there's Hollywood studios for actors and actresses, and it's similar for startup studio world. I'm looking to build the first production Hollywood-like studio for founders to become thought leaders and grow revenue for their company through their personal brand. So I'm listening to all these podcasts like I always do. I'm not a huge reader. I'm a listener guy. So
Same.
I'm listening to all these podcasts always, and I seek advice and learnings and from the luminaries ahead of me in these episodes. I've always
We
done
say as
that.
the sun seems to be moving here and lighting up.
Yeah, exactly. Good timing on that clip.
Yeah.
But the realization I had was I'm like, over the last couple of weeks, maybe month, and all the podcasts I listened to for advice, I kept finding myself thinking, well, that wouldn't work anymore. That wouldn't work anymore. Like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I realized no one's built an empire yet with the tools that are now at our fingertips. That like my business is completely built off of tools that did not exist a year ago, let alone 6 months ago, and will continue to be that way. So I'm like, all the mentorship and knowledge and information that I'm seeking from folks, whether it's directly in a conversation or in a podcast somewhere, I'm like, this doesn't work anymore. I can't go anywhere for advice now. So as you say, it's all up for grabs. It's like a Wild West. It's like, now everyone's kind of free for all. You got to figure this out for you. You can't really take advice at all anymore. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, one, it is a big statement because, as I said before, our big questions are why now, why you? Now, a lot of people in a lot of industries have an answer to the why now question. So it makes it even harder to sort through who's going to disrupt it. I mean, but like we said with the children's book and Stone Soup, there are lessons to be taken. They just can't be applied tactically the same way they have been, right? I still do love, reading those, but I think what I like the most is reading books like on physics and biology, like some of the like building blocks type books that make you think about, like even way over my head when you get past like relativity and just shrink, but way out my head, but it stretches your brain, right? And you look for patterns. And so if everything's going to be different now, what's going to, some people say what's going to be the same, right? Like what's the new hard thing? So if the hard thing, they're saying like the strategy is doing the hard thing. Well, the hard thing might not be tech anymore. So who are the apex founders going forward? Well, it depends on what's hard. Making tequila masterfully, importing, branding. That's the hard thing now. So human connection, that's the hard thing. So that's, I think you look for the new hard things. You try not to, you don't take like a playbook the way it was done because can't be done exactly like that. But I think you look for things that rhyme.
Look for things that rhyme. That might be the title of this episode. That's great.
Yeah, that's the stolen. History might not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. So
yeah, I love it, Joe. This was a really awesome sort of history lesson and story, and it's great to chat with you. For folks listening, how can they follow along your journey on the internet? How you're out here grabbing attention? Where do you want people to pay?
Yeah, I'm one of those people who does actively use LinkedIn. I think it's one of the last social networks because you actually have profiles and when people change jobs and go. So I'm pretty active there, or at least I check my messages. Joe at human.vc. Feel free to reach out. My inbox is not always my best friend, but I try to get to everything. So
awesome, Joe. Thank you so much. Appreciate the time, my friend.
Thanks a lot, Jake.